taking on the job seemed like a simple idea. Sara, a 22-year-old college student, needed some extra money to cover her expenses. When her friend Laura reported an elderly lady needing help taking care of a cat, she didn't think twice before accepting. After all, how could a cat be so much work? Mrs. Eliza's house was a stark contrast to the quiet neighborhood where it was located. Unlike the modern houses around it, its facade had an aged look. Bricks faded with time, windows with heavy curtains that hid the interior, and a solid wooden door whose paint was chipped. When Sara stopped on the sidewalk, she felt a slight shiver, but shook her head, thinking it was just an impression. As soon as she rang the doorbell, the door opened quietly, shifting as if it had been waiting for her to arrive. "Strange," she muttered, hesitantly entering. The inside of the house seemed even older than the outside. There was a peculiar smell in the air, something between mold and a very old floral perfume. Nimbus, the cat, soon appeared. He walked toward her deliberately, as if assessing her presence. It was a white Persian cat, absolutely flawless except for his eyes. They were large, a blue so intense that it specifically pierced her soul. Nimbus stopped a few feet away from her, sitting calmly and blinking slowly, but without looking away. "Sara, is it?" Mrs. Eliza's voice cut through the silence. The woman was exactly as Laura had described her. Slight, with white hair tied in a bun and a tired look in her eyes. "He's going to test you, you know. Cats always test." Before Sara could ask what it did, Eliza handed her a folded piece of paper. "These are the rules. Follow every single one of them and you'll be fine. I have to go now." The old woman grabbed her bag and headed out the door before Sara could react. With the paper in her hands, Sara unfolded it. The list was short, but the instructions were strange, to say the least. Feed Nimbus at 8 p.m., not a minute before or after. Do not let him out of the house under any circumstances. Never open the upstairs bedroom. Do not look directly at Nimbus at midnight. Sara read the rules again, frowning. What kind of person makes rules like that for a cat, she thought. But as she looked at Nimbus, standing in the middle of the room, with those piercing eyes fixed on her, a chill ran down her spine. Night fell quickly, and the house seemed even darker with the twilight. Sara was busy occupying, organizing the kitchen, and checking the rooms downstairs. Nimbus followed her wherever she went, his inaudible footsteps and constant but strangely calm presence making the atmosphere almost suffocating. When the clock struck 8 p.m., Sara remembered the first rule. She filled Nimbus's bowl with the food she found in the pantry and set it on the floor. The cat came forward slowly, almost ceremonially, and began to eat, but he never took his eyes off her. Around 11 p.m., Sara sat down on the couch to relax. That was when she heard the first sound, a scratching sound coming from upstairs. Slow, methodical, as if something was trying to get out. Her heart raced. She looked at Nimbus, waiting for him to react, but the cat was sitting near the stairs, staring into the darkness of the upper floor. A shiver ran through her body. It was just her imagination, right? Maybe some ancient enchantment, or even the wind. But the supports. What would you do in Sara's place? Would you go upstairs to investigate or ignore your children? Continue following this chilling story to find out what Sara found on that disturbing night. The sound of loss did not stop. It was constant, almost rhythmic, as if something, or someone, was attracting Sara's attention. She sat on the couch, clasping her hands tightly, while Nimbus remained standing at the base of the stairs. The cat didn't move, but his gaze was fixed on the floor above, as if he knew something she didn't. Trying to convince herself that it was all just paranoia, Sara grabbed the remote and turned up the volume on the television. The chatter stopped for a moment, but then started again, this time more intense. It was impossible to ignore. "It's just the wood in the house. These old houses always make weird noises," she murmured, trying to calm herself. But she knew it wasn't wood. It was something alive. Not daring to go upstairs, Sara spoke up and went to the kitchen, where she found the list of rules left by Mrs. Elisa again. She reread the third rule: never open the upstairs bedroom. The idea that the sound was coming from that bedroom made her breath quicken. Why would someone leave such a specific rule? And what could be behind that door? Nimbus appeared at her side, as silent as a shadow. Sara jumped, letting out a low scream. "You want to give me a heart attack," she said, trying to climb up lightly, but her voice was shaking. Nimbus just tilted his head, as if he was waiting for her to understand something he couldn't explain. As the night wore on, Sara decided to explore the rooms on the ground floor. Despite her initial resistance, her curiosity got the better of her. The main room was filled with old objects: an old radio on a bookshelf, black and white photographs of people that included rules and series, and several shelves full of books. Nimbus followed the sound closely as she examined the items. It was then that she found something peculiar: a framed photo of Nimbus, but different from how he looked now. The picture looked very old, withered by time, yet it was clearly the same cat, the same white fur, and the same piercing blue eyes. "But how?" she murmured. Beside the photo, a note was pinned. The words were written in careful handwriting. "He's always been here." A shiver ran down her spine, but before she could think too much about it, she caught a new sound. No more scratches. Now it was a soft cracking sound, like someone walking upstairs. Sara felt her fear intensify. Her hand shook as she held the note. She knew something was wrong in the house, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Nimbus, on the other hand, seemed impassive, but continued to follow her every step. Around 11:45 p.m., Sara decided to try to rest on the sofa in the living room. Sleep, however, would not come. The silence in the house was almost as surprising as the noises she had heard before. Everything seemed waiting. That was when the clock struck midnight. Sara felt a change in the atmosphere, as if the air around her had become heavier. A feeling of being watched took over her. Nimbus, who was lying next to the sofa, suddenly screamed and fixed his eyes on her. He did not blink. He did not move a muscle. He just stared at her, exactly as the fourth rule said. Without realizing it, Sara was caught in the cat's eyes. They were mesmerizing, almost like windows to something far beyond what she could understand. A strange feeling began to take over, as if time had stopped. She blinked, breaking eye contact, and Nimbus emitted a low meow, almost like a warning. It was enough to snap her out of that strange trance. However, something was different. The house seemed darker, colder. The noises had stopped, but the feeling of something wrong was even more intense now. Sara managed to avoid Nimbus's gaze in time, but what would have happened if it hadn't? And who, or what was really home with her? The next morning brought a temporary respite. The rays of sunlight that entered through the windows silently dispelled the gloomy weight that had filled the house the night before. Sara tried to convince herself that she had imagined everything. "It's probably the stress," she said out loud, as if speaking helped make her thoughts more real. Nimbus seemed like a completely different creature during the day. He was calm, moving around the house carefree, almost like an ordinary cat. However, Sara couldn't ignore the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Throughout the day, She tried to occupy her mind with mundane tasks. She cleaned the kitchen, answered messages on her cell phone, even tried to watch a movie. But whenever she passed near the stairs, she felt a shiver. The locked room seemed to be calling her. In the early afternoon, Sara decided to give in to her curiosity. She climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under her feet. Nimbus knocked on her, like a shadow. When she reached the top, she stopped in front of the bedroom door. She reached for the doorknob, hesitantly. Nimbus let out a low meow, almost like a warning. The door didn't budge. It was locked. Frustrated, she pushed harder, but it was no use. However, something on the door caught her attention. Deep grooves in the wood, as if something was trying to get out. As she went down, her discomfort grew. In the kitchen, she noticed that Nimbus was sitting again, watching her. Only this time, he wasn't alone. In the reflection of the window, Sara saw something behind her. A tall, motionless, indistinct shadow. When she turned around, there was no one there. Sara's uneasiness only grew. She couldn't shake the idea that there was something in the house. Something that wasn't just Nimbus. Determined to understand, she decided to explore the basement. The room was pitch black, and the air was colder there. Flashlight in hand, she descended the steps, trying to ignore her growing fear. The walls were covered in cobwebs, and the smell of mildew was strong. Deep in the basement, she found boxes filled with old papers and objects. A set of journals caught her eye. The covers were worn but still legible. They had been handed down to Mrs. Elisa. Leafing through the pages, Sara found something disturbing. Eliza described Nimbus' arrival in the house decades ago as a gift from her late husband. However, as the years passed, Nimbus did not age. In one particularly unsettling entry, Eliza wrote, "He is not your average cat. Ever since he arrived, things have started happening. The shadows in the house, the whispers at night, it all started with him." Sara tried to remain calm as she followed the footsteps coming from upstairs, but the sound was too clear and real to ignore. It was different from the previous risks. The footsteps were heavy, deliberate, as if someone were pacing back and forth. She grabbed a flashlight and, even with shaking hands, climbed the stairs. Nimbus was nowhere to be seen. The silence in the house was so profound that Sara could hear her own labored breathing. When she reached the hallway, she noticed something that stopped her cold. The door to the forbidden room, previously locked, was now ajar. She pushed the door open carefully. The room was empty, but the air inside was strange, cold but with a sense of pressure, as if something invisible were occupying the space. In the center of the room sat an old rocking chair. It seemed out of place, as if it were waiting for someone. The most striking presence, however, was the mirror. Large and ornate, it took up most of the opposite wall. Its frame was gilded but worn, with deep-toned marks that were recent. The mirror didn't just reflect the room. It seemed to create an extra depth, as if there was something beyond the glass. Sara walked over to the mirror, feeling mesmerized. When she looked into it, she saw Nimbus reflected inside, but the cat was not in the room. His reflection seemed distorted, taller, almost human. It was as if the mirror was not reflecting reality, but something different, a version of the world where the rules were different. Suddenly, the shadows in the reflection began to move. Initially subtle, they quickly took shape, emerging from the mirror. Dark, elongated hands reached through the glass and reached out to grab her. Sara found out and stepped back, but felt something cold touch her arm. The sensation was terrible, as if she were being drained of energy. She managed to let go and fall to the floor, But when she looked into the mirror again, she saw something that almost made her lose consciousness. Inside, among the shadows, was a tall figure with slanted, empty eyes. It seemed to be watching, waiting. Nimbus appeared in the bedroom doorway, but its eyes had a different glow now. They were no longer just penetrating. They reflected on the same emptiness of the mirror. It was as if the cat were an intermediary between Sara and whatever inhabited the mirror. Sara ran out, down the stairs, but they escaped her again, now coming from all sides. It was as if the walls were alive, echoing the children who had tormented her from the beginning. On the floor of the living room, she found the note she had read earlier. "He has always been here." Now there was something else written in small letters in the corner. "And he will never leave." Sara woke up with a start, not knowing how she had ended up in the basement. Around her, Mrs. Eliza's diaries were scattered across the floor. The light from the flashlight, now dim, created shadows that, in addition, moved of their own accord. Fighting against panic, she opened another diary, desperately searching for answers. The pages were full of disturbing investigations, shadows that appeared at night, suggestions that came from the mirror, and Nimbus's increasingly strange behavior. In a final entry, Eliza wrote, "He's not just a cat. He's a guardian, a bridge between our world and something much older, something that shouldn't be here. The mirror is the portal. Never look at it directly." Sara understood that she was dealing with something beyond her comprehension. But why her? Why did the house seem to choose her? What did Eliza know that she hadn't revealed? Determined to put an end to this, Sara climbed the stairs again, determined to face the mirror. This time, she took with her one of the old books I'd found in the basement. Its pages contained symbols and rituals that promised protection. As she stepped into the room, the mirror began to vibrate, emitting a low, pulsing sound that made her ears hurt. The shadows within it grew more intense, almost piercing through the glass. Nimbus was there again, but now completely different. His paws were shaking, and he looked conflicted, as if he were trying to fight off an invisible force. Sara opened the book and began to read what seemed to be an incantation, even though she didn't fully understand the words. The mirror reacted, shaking more violently, and the shadows began to retreat. However, an invisible force surrounded Sara against the wall, almost taking away her consciousness. When she managed to get up, she saw that Nimbus was in front of the mirror, looking at her. He seemed more human now, as if the lines between animals and mythical creatures had disappeared. The cat tilted its head, and a voice echoed through the room, deep and inhuman. "You should never have come." Suddenly, the mirror shattered, sending fragments flying all over the room. The shadows disappeared. The house fell into complete silence. Sara looked around, but Nimbus was gone. Desperate, she fled the house and went to the head of her apartment. However, when she opened the door to her living room, she found Nimbus waiting for her on the sofa, looking at her with those narrow, empty eyes. She responded and ran outside, but the last thing I heard before I passed out was the sound of a meowing sound coming from the back of her mind. Did this story give you the creeps? What would you do if you were Sara? Be sure to comment below and subscribe for more scary stories like this. And remember, sometimes the eyes you're staring into may not be as harmless as they seem.